Today I'm very excited because I will show you something what I consider to be a heavy hitter in my, well, not technically my collection per se, but our collection. You all know the Navitimer. It's almost like a brand name of its own, or being at least as famous as the manufacturer's name itself in the watch world by now. It is often named among the most iconic watch models of our time. Two aspects make this particular watch right here stand out in the plethora that is Navitimer reviews on YouTube. For one, this watch is from the Montbrilliant series, and we'll get into that. And secondly, this 40mm watch is not my own, but rather my wife's. If I'm not mistaken, that is a rather unique clientele for the Navitimer, but goes to show how far off many other brands can be when trying to market watches specifically to women by lazily slapping some shiny stones onto them. The only problem, of course, is the fact that I would love to wear this one right here as much as my wife does. Anyway, in this video, I will touch upon both of these topics and give you all the details of this 2012 Breitling Navitimer Montbrilliant. And I'll also add some info about the service that I had just done on this watch by Breitling. My name is Jan, and you're watching the Time Channel. This Montbrilliant limited edition serves as a great start to talk about Breitling's history, since it references back to Breitling's beginnings, when Léon Breitling opened his watch factory 1892 in the Rue Montbrilliant in La Chaux-de-Fonds, Switzerland. But it has to be noted that Breitling was founded 8 years before that in Saint-Imier, which gets often overlooked, since Breitling's history was and still is so intertwined with La Chaux-de-Fonds. Since the beginning, Breitling was at the forefront of wrist chronograph development for aviation, with one of the first wrist chronos with a separate push piece, or the first patent for the two-pusher chrono in 1934. And in 1940, they applied for a patent on a circular slide rule for wrist chronographs, which was soon to become the Chronomat, which in turn paved the way for the famous Navitimer series from 1952 onwards. The slide rule provided assistance in all types of calculations, such as fuel consumption, climb and descent rates, etc., but not only in kilometers, but also miles and nautical miles. But if you're interested in what I deem as the best use for this in our current time and smartphone age, stick around until later in the video. The company remained in the hands of various descendants of Léon Breitling, namely Gaston and Willy Breitling, while the latter sold the rights to the brand in 1979 to the pilot and entrepreneur Ernest Schneider, who was until then known for his involvement in Sakura watches. The Schneider family held shares of Breitling from then on, until very recently. In 1982, Breitling built up a new production facility in Grenchen and moved there as the Breitling Montre SA. Notable models from that initial era in Grenchen was the rebooted Chronomat and the Aerospace. In that same era, Breitling also started building quartz models, and I myself used to own a Breitling Shark, for example, from the 90s. 1999 marked another milestone, since all of Breitling's mechanical watches were then tested by the COSC, a procedure which was also introduced for the quartz models in 2001. 2002, the production of mechanical watches came back to its initial home in La Chaux-de-Fonds. Now, 2009, with a 125-year history under its belt, Breitling released the B01 in-house caliber, which also powers this watch, but more on that later. Since 2017, Georges Caron, former head of watchmaking at the Richemont Group, became CEO of Breitling, and I think his leadership is noticeable also in the current developments of the brand and its lineups, which I very much appreciate as a personal opinion. But let's focus on this watch, this Navitimer Montbrilliant 01. So we have a stainless steel case with 40mm in diameter without the crown, 47mm from lug to lug, and a height of 14mm in total at the thickest point. It is an oversized look on my wife's 15.5cm wrist, but I think it fits her and also me with my 18cm wrist quite nicely. And I also just love how she appreciates the whole very vintage inspired or classical look of this watch. The corrugated bidirectional bezel lets you operate the heart of any Navitimer, the circular slide rule located underneath the sapphire crystal. And on the side, we have an unthreaded crown with the vintage B stemming from the first half of the 20th century. And the whole look is completed by those, well, vintage-inspired pump chrono pushers. The whole watch I would consider a lightweight, coming in at 85 grams, together with this leather strap, so not too heavy at all. About the strap, the watch comes with a 20mm lug width, and I have it on the original brown crocodile leather strap with the white stitching, which tapers down to 18 millimeters at this original Breitling pin buckle with the winged logo here. Although I must say the pilot bracelet that was also available looks stunning as well, and I know how comfortable Breitling bracelets are. Given the whole construction of the watch with the rotatable slide rule, the unthreaded crown, the whole watch is only 30 meters water resistant, which shouldn't come to you as a surprise considering this is a pilot's watch. About the watch face, the dial and rehaut are white, whilst the slide rule already dominates the look of the dial, and the red 100th scale adds another layer of 1940s chronomat reference to it. As you can see, this AB0130 was available with Arabic numerals as our indexes, but also without them, and additionally there was a blue dialed version as well. The hour and minutes hand are silver in color, and their shape is almost Dauphine in style, but since it's not tapered at the rear end, I would rather call them just triangular as a whole. There's no lume on them, and in fact there's no lume on this watch at all. The red chronoseconds hand provides an additional splash of color though. The date window resides in between 4 and 5 o'clock, something to love or hate, and it has a nice instantaneous date change thanks to the B01 movement. About the functionality, one can argue that a calculator slide rule has become superfluous, but there is one occasion where it is in my opinion quicker to use than any smartphone: traveling, or to be more precise, foreign currency. For example, I would set my inner scale here to be the euro scale. So to adjust it, I would say that this is 10 or 1.0 euros, and I'll set it to, for example, 1.7 or 17 in foreign currency. And now I'm always able to just read off how much, let's say, maybe 17 euros are in the foreign currency, because that would be just what I can read off on the outer scale. 29 here. Quite handy, don't you think? Let's have a look at the case back, so drum roll please. Unfortunately, this one doesn't have a display case back, so a direct view of the B01 column wheel chronograph movement is unfortunately not in the cards. But we have a special engraving here which just references nicely to the heritage of this Montbrillion watch, showing off the production facilities located at the Ruelle Montbrillion here. Given its looks, it's not the most beautiful movement I would say, and doesn't brandish many decorative elements or finishing aside from some Côte de Genève pattern or snailing, and it is therefore maybe not a surprise that we have no display case window here. The B01 has now fully arrived in mass production and in many Breitling model lines, but it was also Breitling's first endeavor with an in-house chronograph movement. The development started in 2004 and it was announced in 2009. My wife is thus the only one in our little household that owns a column wheel chronograph with vertical coupling in this small family. I'm of course not jealous at all or something. But why is that so nice? Well, the vertical coupling and column wheel ensure that the time measurement is not negatively influenced by the initial start-stopping impulse from the pushers. On my cheaper chronos, you can always notice how the chronosecond does a little leap forward when you start the measurement, which ultimately already introduces a small error into the measurement. Look at how smoothly and therefore accurately it works with the B01 here. I could do this all day. The instantaneous date change is another technical aspect which I just love on this watch. The date snaps into place at as close to midnight as possible, where other watches might even start 3 hours earlier with a very slow date change. Overall, we have a frequency of 28,800 beats per hour or 4 Hz. This watch sits on a whopping 47 joules, has 70 hours of power reserve, the aforementioned instantaneous date change. It is COSC certified with its accuracy, and it has a KIF shock absorption system. So with this watch, I would like to talk a little bit more in detail about the price. So if you're my wife, oh God, this sounds wrong. If you're my wife, please stop the video now. This watch is around 5,000 euros used with box and papers on Chrono24 right now. Now, everyone will tell you that you should not only consider the price of the initial purchase, but also the cost of ownership, or in particular, the necessity to service a mechanical watch. I usually leave that part out because most of my watches are third-party powered EDAs, Solidas, etc., which makes that cost comparably low. Additionally, I don't adhere to a set-in-stone kind of interval servicing my watches. Anyway, this B01 definitely needed a service, since the chronograph would just stop after roughly 30 seconds. So the watch was sent in to Breitling by my local watchmaker, since he was not able to fix that issue or didn't have the parts himself for this in-house movement. The watch was gone for roughly 2 months and came back in a little service case, which will make a good traveling companion in the future. But you could say that this case was discs included in the price tag of 738 euros for the whole service. And they just give you a rough idea of what they actually or exactly did. But the receipt said that the hands have been exchanged, and of course the movement was serviced and repaired completely. Gaskets renewed and the functionality retested, etc. Quite a price tag, but I think it is worth it, and I'm just happy about the watch's return to an immaculate state. But that Breitling service was, in my opinion, very reasonable, and cheaper than some other service estimates that I got for a Neo vintage piece, for example, where I wanted only my crystal exchanged, looking at you, Tag Heuer. But let's leave it at that. Now I'm really curious of what you think about the Navitimer Mont Brilliant 01 in comparison with all the other Navitimers out there. It is indeed a nice alternative as a ladies' watch, or the perfect example of a unisex chronograph. I know the temptation of the old Navitimer aesthetic, so I think this is maybe not your typical Navitimer for a not so typical 40mm Navitimer customer. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Thanks for taking the time and watching. See you in the next one.